As a preacher, I have to confess a kind of envy of Jesus. I mean, here's a guy who just goes to the shore for a quiet afternoon, and crowds come out and gather around him, eager to hear what he has to say, eager to hang on every word. And the crowds are not just some meager gathering of people. They push in, and they are so large that Jesus has nowhere to go except to back up into the sea. And eventually, he finds himself sitting on a pontoon pulpit. Can you imagine the envy of preaching from a pontoon pulpit? What kind of church strategy was it that Jesus was using in order to generate that sort of excitement, that sort of crowd that would come out and push in so hard that he had to retreat to the sea? What intentionality, what new program must have been used there? Church growth people have used different techniques from time to time, realizing that the resources available to most congregations oftentimes are rather limited. And so we don't want to waste them. We want to be able to invest our precious time, our valuable financial and physical resources. We want to invest them in places and in ways where we can get, well, the biggest impact, the biggest return on that investment. I had a grandfather who owned a small farm. He may have been one of the most frugal people I've ever known. Saved everything because he thought he might use it. Was really sort of stingy with seed and fertilizer and the way in which he did his farming. Everything he did was calculated and intentional. And so I must confess that I'm a bit surprised when I read the gospel story that I just shared with you. Because there in that particular text, the farmer, the sower, is casting seed carelessly. It's here, it's there, it's everywhere. And he's even planting this seed without ever plowing his field to begin with. But Jesus tells us this story for a reason. There's stuff to be learned here. But what we learn is something about, not about farming, but something about the character of the farmer. Something about the character of this one who is sowing the word and is doing it in such a way, such a generous way, that it seems almost careless. It sort of challenges our sensibilities, challenges the way that we've been behaving or acting, but calls us to learn something about the character of Jesus, the character of God. We have heard another story today about the character of God. This one not a New Testament story, but an Old Testament story, the writing from the book of Isaiah. Isaiah is telling a story about a generous gardener as well. He's telling about the ways in which the trees and the grasses of the meadows will clap their hands and will rejoice at the great things that God is doing. It tells us the story of a God who brings rain and sun to fall on righteous and unrighteous as well. Isaiah 2 captures something about the character, the generous character of the garden. Now, when Isaiah is writing, he is writing to a group of people who find themselves in exile. people who were part of a defeated nation, who were gathered up from their homeland and taken far from where they had lived and were enslaved in a foreign land, serving people who worshiped some foreign god. But the Lord raises up Isaiah to come and to speak to them and to bring them a word of hope. Isaiah comes to speak to those people and to share with them a story of a generous God who would bring reconciliation and restoration to those people who were ripped from their homelands. And when that would happen, even the trees and the grass of the meadow would sit up and take notice. What a powerful story. But before we get too Pollyanna about that story, let's take a moment and think about what really happened. The great things which the prophet was talking about did happen. And they didn't happen. It didn't come together as neatly and as glorious a way as people had first imagined. You see, the folks who eventually came out of the exile and went back to the homeland was actually a rather small group. Many, if not most, never left the land of the exile, because the road back was a hard road. We know the prophecies about making straight the road in the wilderness, lowering the mountains, raising up the valleys, but it was not that. It was a hard road back that demanded unbelievable faithfulness. It demanded perseverance. It demanded endurance. It required the additional work of even more prophets. It needed the leadership of Ezra and Nehemiah so that out of the obscure and hard place of exile, Israel might be restored. And so when Jesus teaches his disciples this parable, the disciples and Jesus are in similar circumstances. The last couple of weeks we have heard the stories about how the disciples went out and they speak the word, but people don't want to receive it. They reject not only the message, but the messengers as well. So Jesus is trying to give some encouragement, not unlike what Isaiah did to those in exile. Jesus speaks of hope that life is going to take root in some unlikely places. And the generous God, a God of abundance, a God who scatters the word almost carelessly, will see to it that seeds land in the right places. Now, I know for many people, when we read the story of the sower, when we read the story about all the different kinds of soil, you know, the path, the rocky stuff, and so forth, when we read those things, one of the first things we do is pause and we try to figure out, what kind of soil am I? Well, I'm not sure that gets us too many places when we try to sort that out. And so before you spend a lot of time trying to size up your soil type, I want you to know this. Farmers know, and my wife, the gardener, knows that good soil is broken soil. When the soil is broken and turned over, it's upside down, inside out, it's mixed up. There are rough edges that are exposed. There's stuff that hasn't seen sunlight for some time that suddenly is right on top for all to see. There's other things that we wanted people to know that are buried. Good soil is broken soil. And so when we contemplate who we are, truth is, we're broken. We shared confession earlier in this service. We know the world doesn't work the way we wish it did. We know that we have said some things while we've been stuck together in a house, sort of self-quarantined and limited in our relationships. We've said stuff to one another. We've behaved in certain ways that are not our most virtuous moments. We know that we are broken. But do not despair in your brokenness. Because Jesus comes to teach us about the character of the sower who will come with abundant seed, who will share it generously, and when it lands among those that are broken, when it lands in the good soil, it will produce fruit. Amid the loud and angry voices of our world, amid the hatred, the prejudice, the ridiculous explosion of gun violence in the last week, even in such hostile situations, in such hostile environment, the word will find enough to sprout and to grow. And just when you think the end is at hand, it bears fruit. It topples monuments to white supremacy. It shatters border walls. It brings tyrants down. It speaks love into situations of intolerance and hate. When the seed lands among the broken soil, it produces an amazing abundance. Even Isaiah claimed that. As Isaiah said, "It shall accomplish that which I purpose and succeed in the things for which I sent it." Thanks be to God that he is a sower of great generosity and abundance. And thanks be to God that our broken soil can be the good soil.